Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Richard Yao. So Loretta and the rest, they talk about the on-site benefits of sustainable forest management. I'll be talking about the broader values of planted forests. So valuing sustainable forestry. So we know that there are multiple benefits that planted forests provide. So it provides you with timber, and timber is actually in the GDP, so it's quite obvious. But you also have avoided erosion, recreation habitats. These are non-market values that are poorly understood and are often ignored in policy and decision making. This is the reason why there's been an increasing interest on the ecosystem services framework that allows to quantify, describe, and represent the full value of forest ecosystems into land use decisions. So there have been a growing interest globally from the governments and the businesses and other sectors about the full value of ecosystem services. And in New Zealand, we have the Resource Management Act that actually recognizes that we need to quantify or account for both monetary and non-monetary values in decision making. So this is stated in the ecosystem service approach that was done by the Waikato Regional Council, and also businesses in New Zealand, they're also embracing the ecosystem service concept. And even in FSC certification, ecosystem service you can see being included in the certification process because it's really helpful to have quantification so that we need to measure so that we can manage it better. Okay, so there have been, using the ecosystem service concept, there have been multiple frameworks that have been developed. One of them is the New Zealand, the forest investment framework that we developed for New Zealand planted forests. So FIF is actually a tool that combines data from spatial, productivity, and economic and environmental models. And putting all this data together, we could actually quantify the timber viability of both exotic and native forests anywhere in New Zealand. And on top of that, we can quantify the volume of carbon sequestration as well as avoided erosion values. And then we can actually put a dollar value on these different ecosystem services so that we can quantify them and also present these multiple values in decision making. So we were approached by the Winita Forest Products to basically assess the multiple benefits of their planted forest. So we use FIF to quantify the timber profit. So we provide this spatial explicit layer. On top of that, we also look at the carbon sequestration values and avoided erosion values. So given that we have quantified them spatially explicitly, we can actually stack them up. And then we can see here that timber is actually only 41%, while the value of carbon and avoided erosion combined is actually higher than the timber profit value, which is, although we're basically imagining the forest for timber, but it also provides you with these other important benefits. And on top of that, the assessment for the Winita Forest Products allowed us to develop this recreation hunting layer for FIF. So we were able to collect some recreational pig hunting data from Winita, and we were able to calculate that it's about $250,000 per year. So this is over and above, this other ecosystem services values. Under the GCFF program, we were able to add 4 more additional functions to FIF. So these are the biodiversity enhancement, where we can look at the value of native habitats provision of forests. We also have developed the water use that was presented by Amanda earlier, the Rayeta water use model. So it's been incorporated into forest investment framework right now, and it actually gives this water footprint value. And we also developed this avoided nitrogen leaching, which also provides this nutrient mitigation value of forests. And on top of that, we have the recreation value of forests. So all these are non-market values that helps to inform sustainable forest management initiatives. Because there are lots of details of these different functions, but I'm going to focus on the biodiversity enhancement function of FIF. So to develop the biodiversity enhancement function, we have interviewed more than 1,000 households across New Zealand, and then we asked them if they would be willing to financially support a 5-year brown kiwi conservation program in New Zealand planted forests. And based on the survey, we were able to find that even though the North Island brown kiwi they're in the North Island, so we can see that you have high willingness to pay of households in the North Island, but even South Island people, they would be willing to pay to support North Island brown kiwi conservation. And then we have aggregated this willingness to pay nationally for the whole of New Zealand. And then we were able to calculate it's about $111 million per year for the 5-year program. So this willingness to pay aggregated can actually be considered as the potential New Zealand investment fund for biodiversity conservation in planted forests implemented by DOC. And then we have also asked Bruce Rhys Burns of the Department of Conservation based in Rotorua to help us identify where can we do this biodiversity enhancement program in planted forests. And Rhys actually helped us identify these 12 different sites in the North Island. And then we also asked him to help us calculate the cost of the conservation of brown kiwi. And we actually arrived at about $747,000 per year. So now to answer the question, does the economic benefit of biodiversity enhancement exceed the cost of conservation? So the answer is definitely a yes. And in fact, this investment is actually about 149:1. So even though, let's say 50% of New Zealanders would actually pay for conservation, this is still going to be very, it's going to be several-fold higher than the cost of conservation. Okay, so we have applied FIF in at least 20 case studies in New Zealand, which is quite exciting. So the information from FIF was able to inform, stakeholders' decisions. We were approached by iwi groups and landowners to quantify, to assess the afforestation potential of marginal land. We've applied it in 4 case studies, and we were also approached by regional councils and national government agencies to look at regional economic development. And then we were able to provide FIF data to inform the policy models that were run at the different regions. And then in terms of ecosystem service assessment, we have done at least 9 case studies. Actually, 3 of these ecosystem service assessments were in the South Island, so the Marlborough, and then here in Southland, and also for the Winita forest products. And the one that we did for Winita actually helped to renew their forest certification renewal, which is quite interesting. Okay, so we have looked at the entire 1.72 million hectare of planted forest in New Zealand, so using a geospatial technique. So these are the existing planted forests in New Zealand. And then we have used FIF to look at the broader value of this planted forest. So we look at 4 ecosystem services. So we look at timber, we express it in dollars per hectare per year, carbon sequestration, nutrients, avoided nitrogen leaching actually, and then we have avoided erosion. So you can see here in the erosion panel that Gisborne, you have some dark areas there, so it's indicating that there's high avoided erosion value provided by planted forests, especially in the Gisborne region. So now that we have spatially explicitly quantified the ecosystem services, we can stack them up for the different regions, and you can see that the timber value is actually about 20 to 30% of the forests in the different regions. And then if you look at carbon and avoided nitrogen, they're actually higher than timber in terms of proportion. And look at Gisborne, so you can see very high avoided erosion value because of the planted forest there. Okay, so what are the impacts of valuing ecosystem services? So the quantification or description of ecosystem services actually provide independently quantified broader value to support FSC certification. As you know, FSC is quite important in New Zealand, about 1.1 million hectares of planted forest there, FSC certified. And I recently attended the IUFOR World Congress in Brazil, and there was a Japanese professor who showed that there's actually a price premium for certified products. He looked at chopping board in Japan, so Japanese were actually willing to pay 50% higher for an FSC certified cutting or chopping board, so which I find really interesting. And if you quantify the ecosystem services, it informs the management of ecosystem services of government agencies. For instance, you have the Billion Trees program, so you can actually look at timber as well as the broader values of newly planted trees. And on top of that, New Zealand banks are actually developing financial products to account for the value of natural capital and ecosystem services. So ANZ, BNZ, they now have some financial instruments to support ecosystem service management. And also the quantification helps to inform implementation of our new freshwater policies. So thank you very much.